Hey everyone, it's Owen here, and today I'm going to be unboxing what might be one of the most hyped Noctua fans that has been launched recently. These are the Noctua NF-A12X15 PWM and the NF-A9X14HS PWM. These fans are the slim fans on the 12 and 9 centimeters fan sizes. So these are pretty popular for these small form factor PC enthusiasts, and that's why they have been waiting for these fans, so we shall see how good they are. Now for the specifications of the fans, you can see the 92mm NF-A9X14 fan has a higher RPM speed than the standard NF-A9X14 because this is the HS-PWM version, which is the same as the fans that you get in the NHL9i coolers, which you get the higher speed fans. Now for the NF-A12X15 PWM, these specifications are exactly the same as the non-Chromax series fans. The difference is that with these Chromax fans, as you can see from the very nice packaging with the glossy pictures and everything, you do get some color changeable rubber strips that you can put on the edges of the fans to change the look of the fan and match your build. Now, and that is the whole appeal of the Chromax line of fans that Noctua has put out, because people have been asking Noctua for ages to make fans that are not just tan and poop brown in color, which is, well, kind of revolting, I guess, in a PC build that's themed to have a specific color, because they really don't match anything. So now opening the packaging, you can see the fans are straight up on top of the packaging, and the packaging is kind of similar to the IPPC and the Redux series. It's not as premium as the standard series of fans, but I think it's for cost reduction, since making the fans black and including the rubber mounting pads have already increased the price, so they have to cheap out in the packaging slightly. But that's not a problem, because what matters most is the product itself. And here we can see the NF-A9X14HS PWM. The fan is all black now. There's no sign of brown except for the badge at the back, which is still a metal cover instead of a plastic sticker. It's still a metal badge on the back of the motor, and you also get the anti-vibration rubber pads that you can put on the fans. As you can see, you actually get 8 of them on these fans instead of just 4 on like the NF-F12s, probably because these are really small, so you can stick them on the corners. They are double-sided tape, so it's not as ideal as the snap-on ones of the bigger fans, but these are thinner fans, so what they had to do was that they had to use this like double-sided tape rubber mounting pads on the fans, but you can put it on both sides because they have 8 of them included for each color. Now on the NF-A12X15 PWM, you can see the fan is also all black, and what's really nice is that Noctua also made the center, which is usually silver on the center fan, now also black, which matches the whole fan look really nicely, and it does look really sleek. And I don't really mind the gold like centerpiece. That's just a locking ring, and to me that doesn't bother me too much, so that's not a big deal to me. Now an interesting thing is that with the Chromax fans, they do have a removable power cable, so you have like a really short power cable, then you can use an extension which is included, the Noctua fan cable extension, to make it longer and reach somewhere else. Again, the back of the motor has a metal sticker on it instead of just a crappy plastic one like most fans. And like I said, these are the really thin, slim fans, so not standard height, but they do still perform pretty well according to most tests that I have seen online. They're pretty on par to the thicker fans, maybe just 1 or 2 degrees worse when used on a CPU cooler. But these are really a godsend on an SFF PC because, well, now you can use a really good fan on your SFF PC and you don't have to worry about the color being bad. That's why these are pretty hyped. And as you can see with these fans, you still also get the Noctua features like the stepped inlet and also the raindrop looking shapes on the inside, which is supposed to reduce turbulence and noise. And you also still get the flow acceleration channels on the fan blades. Now for the NF-A12 again, the anti-vibration pads, which I'm gonna show you guys, it does have a bigger one because it's a larger fan size, but it's still a stick-on type. There's simply probably no space to put a snap-on one like on the full-size fans, but no matter, you still get 8 of them instead of on the standard fans, which you can only get 4 of them. So with these fans, you can actually put it on both sides. And with these fans, you also get a couple of choices of colors, which you can see here. There's white, green, black, blue, red, and yellow. So you can pretty much match most systems that you want to build to a theme, because most PCs are sort of around that color range. And if you want to, you could always just put white or just leave it blank and use some RGB lights. And these will go perfectly with any builds that you want to color match now, instead of having a really garish brown color that shouts that I have a Noctua. Although some people might like that, and honestly, even me, I don't mind the brownness sometimes, but some systems I still do just want a black fan. So these are really nice to have black fans from Noctua. And these are still the same quality fans, there's no downgrade, it's the exact same thing, it's just that they're black. But Noctua has taken way too long to make it black, because apparently it's hard to dye them black. Hi everyone, it's Owen here from Zotac, and today I have this RTX 2060 Super Jetstream from Palit to unbox. And I'll do a video on this card, but for now, let's do an unboxing and show you what's inside on this package of the RTX 2060 Super. So let's first take a look at the box, and here we see the Palit Jetstream branding on the front of the box, and I'm quite surprised they didn't put any pictures of the graphics card itself on the front. And down on the bottom you obviously see the branding for the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 2060 Super, and on the side here you also see the 8GB model is this thing. So the Super version has 8 versus 6GB on 2060 Standard Edition. And you also got the features like, well, the Turing architecture, GDDR6, RTX ray tracing, and NVIDIA DLSS. On the top, there's not really much to see, and most of the stuff on the sides are, well, not interesting. It's just more pictures and nothingness. So let's take a look at the back of the box. Here we'll see that there's a bunch of features listed for the graphics cards, and you can see the key features and the minimum requirements, and it's all in different languages, but the thing is, these are not that important. This is just normal features that you get from any RTX cards, and these are the minimum requirements to run this, which says you need a 550 watt or more power supply, because this card does have a 215 watt TDP according to their website, and if you check the BIOS, it is actually that much. So this thing does have a raised TDP compared to the standard RTX 2060 Super specification. So I'm hoping this will be good for overclocking, but yeah. Whoops. Okay, let's take a look inside. Okay, just like most graphics cards, there's an empty box and a more sturdy inner box on the inside. So this is all very nice. It's not just a plain cardboard box, it's actually a black box, so it feels like the higher quality cards, and that makes sense given that the Jetstream is one of the, you know, higher end cards from Palit. And it's just that it's an unfortunate thing. They used to call it the Super Jetstream, but then NVIDIA named their cards the Super cards, so that wouldn't work. So now they just call it the RTX 2060 Super JS or Jetstream. There's no Super Jetstream branding anymore from Palit. So yeah, that's kind of probably annoying for their marketing team, who has been showing their Super Jetstream branding before. And here's the user guide that you get. I mean, just like any user guide, I don't really think you need a lot of that if you know what you're doing. And here's the graphics card driver. I would have loved if they sent just like a USB stick or something, because who the hell still has a CD reader these days? So, seems like I don't get any accessories here. Don't know if it's because this is a press sample or if it's just like that, but well, I just get the graphics card itself. So let's take a look then. It's all padded in this nice foam padding, so it wouldn't get destroyed in shipping. Should be pretty safe. And the graphics card itself is in the middle of all that padding on this anti-static bag. So let's open it up and take a quick look. There we go. Oh boy, I can tell you this is a very thick graphics card. As you can see, it's a triple slot RTX 2060 Super design. Mostly because this is based off of the PCB and cooler of the RTX 2070 Super card. They're basically the same thing underneath. It's just a different chip. So let's take a look at the back because, hey, we're at the back for now. Here you see the Jetstream branding on the backplate, and it does have a very nice brushed aluminum backplate on the rear. And I think it makes it look high quality, and the great thing is that they actually use thermal pads behind the VRM to heatsink the heat from the VRM to the backplate, so it's actually semi-functional in that case. I think they also heatsink the VRAM chips. Like I said, this is one of their higher end cards, so it does have a very beefy cooler as well as a very beefy power delivery system. As you can see there, as a hint, there's an 8-pin and a 6-pin, which is more than the standard 2060 Super requires. Now you don't get an SLI connector over here because the RTX 2060 Super with the the TU106 chip, I think, yeah, that thing does not support SLI. It only is supported on the higher end cards and with a TU104 die, like on the RTX 2070 Super and up. So yeah, but I mean these days you don't really use dual cards much anymore, like no games really support it. Anyways, that's the whole reason why most graphics cards these days are triple slot thick, because not a lot of people use two of them side by side anymore, so spacing isn't really an issue. Now on the front of the cards you can see there's two fans here. These are Palit's higher end cards, so they do have their fancy fans here. It's not just the blade design, but the thing that I'm really impressed is that they actually put 6-pole 3-phase motors on the fan motors itself. Not one of those cheapo 4-pole 2-phase motors you see on every single fan out these days. And for the heatsink, you can see a clearer picture under here. There's a base plate that cools the memory and the VRM, and the heatsink just extends all the way up to the top till under the fan. So this is a pretty huge heatsink. It's just that I wish they used some bigger fans because the fan doesn't cover some parts of the heatsink very slightly, but I don't think that'll make too much of a difference, but I guess we'll find out in my review. But for now, this is the unboxing, and here we see the front side is pretty exposed for the heatsink. I think that looks pretty industrial, although it would be nice if they would just put a cover on this side of the heat pipes or something, because that doesn't look that pretty, and maybe if they nickel plated it, it would look even better too. But yeah, this thing has the 6+8-pin power connector, and the Jetstream has actually one of the most ridiculously overkill VRMs for an RTX 2060 Super, being that it uses the VRM for the RTX 2070 Super as well as the 2080 Super Jetstream. It's all the same as far as I know, but I guess we'll know once I take it apart in the review as well. But as far as I know, they're the same. So this thing has a 500 amp VRM for the core, which is absolutely ridiculously overkill for an RTX 2060 Super. So I'll be looking at how this thing overclocks, maybe with shunt mods. But yeah, that's the whole look of this card, and this is the side that you'll be seeing most of the time in your PC case. There's the GeForce RTX mandated branding on the top and the Jetstream branding here, which I think this thing lights up, so it'll look pretty nice in a PC, I think. Although they do use a bit too much plastic, so I hope they change the material sometime. Oh wait, I think the RGB are these parts, not the Jetstream branding. There's like these strips, and they light up an RGB color that you can control from their software. But yeah, this looks like a pretty interesting RTX 2060 Super. Is definitely one of the thicker ones and has one of the most powerful VRMs, so let's hope this actually performs really well. Hey everyone, it's Owen here from Zotac, and in this video I'll be doing an unboxing of the GeForce GTX 1650 low profile edition from MSI. So this is a GTX 1650 like any other GTX 1650. It's based on a Turing architecture with GDDR5 on this version. Supposedly they're coming out with the GDDR6 version, so that'll be interesting to see. But the interesting thing about this card is because it's a half-height card as a low profile card, it is still a GTX 1650, which is a 75 watt power limit card, even on the bigger cards. So it's quite interesting in that the performance might be very similar to the more expensive bigger cards, even in the smaller form factor of a half-height card, which makes this a very interesting option for the low-profile, cheap Dell and HP PCs that you can buy off eBay, which you can turn into a gaming PC by just slotting this in, or even for a small form factor HTPC case like the Silverstone case I reviewed a while back. But yeah, let's take a look at the box, and then we'll talk about this card even more once we get inside. There really isn't much. There's just a picture of the card and also some features on the back. Being most prominent is the low profile design, and they included a low profile bracket for it too, a half height slot bracket. But yeah, inside the box there isn't much. There's just a user guide, and also the card itself being packed in some foam. So that's pretty nice. And you know, I guess this is because this is a pretty cheap card. There isn't really lots of accessories, and I don't mind about that as long as they can keep the price low. And being that a low profile card, this is actually kind of expensive for GTX 1650, but that's just how it is when you want something small and compact. But yeah, inside the anti-static plastic bag, here you see the GTX 1650 low profile card from MSI. And as you can see, it has two fans for the cooling assembly. And the cooling system itself is just a small piece of extruded aluminum. There's nothing fancy about it, but there is some thermal pads contacting the heatsink to the memory chips on the board, which is a bit different compared to the older generation GTX 1050 that I had before. And with this card, as you can see, there isn't any power connector because this is all powered by the slot. It's a PCIe 3.0 slot for any modern motherboards and CPUs basically, and it's powered by the slot entirely at 75 watts of power limit. And this is very interesting because it means you can fit this into lots of system and have the display port, have an HDMI port and a DVI port available to you, while also having the horsepower of a GTX 1650 in a small form factor PC. And it probably would perform the same as a bigger card too, because like I said, even the bigger cards are officially limited to 75 watts TDP by not EVGA. Whoops, when did I say that? I meant by NVIDIA. So there really isn't a reason why a bigger card should perform better, except sometimes the ones with the 6-pin might have an increasable power limit for overclocking. But yeah, for GTX 1650, this is very versatile, which means you can put it on a small form factor case, which, by the way, here is the included half slot adapter that you can put on the graphics card itself. So they included this slot, and this kind of just goes over here, and as you can see, this is really half the well, not quite half, but you know, a lot shorter in size compared to the bigger full-size PCIe slot that's available on the card by default. But yeah, this is the card itself. There's just a simple heatsink and two fans. There isn't much to say about it, but one thing that is quite interesting to me is that if you can see closely here, there is the shunt resistor there, which is used for power limiting. And I'm just thinking, you know, because it's there, you can actually shunt mod this card to use more power than 75 watts and maybe even beat the bigger cards by just putting like liquid metal on that. Obviously, it's not quite the most recommended thing to do because that means you'll be overdrawing over 75 watts through the slot, which is not the best thing to do. But hey, you know, it shouldn't burn up motherboard instantly. So technically, I think it should handle it just fine even if you do that. And that makes it quite interesting because the previous GTX 1050 and 1050 Ti's were quite limited in power because they didn't have shunt resistors that you can mod like this, like the newer cards. But yeah, there isn't much else to talk about in this card, but I'm not sure I'm going to be testing it because I kind of took apart my HTPC. I was planning on using it on that, but I think I'm not going to end up using it. So this might be the only video you'll see of me on this card. Hey everyone, it's Owen here from Zotac, and in this video I'll be taking a look at the Asus ROG Strix B450i Gaming ITX motherboard. Now I know I've been kind of late in this video because, you know, this thing launched quite a while ago with the B450 chipset and the Ryzen 2000 series, but now it's been updated to support the Ryzen 3000 series just like any other B450 motherboards sold these days. And I chose this motherboard for my up and coming PC build that's gonna be replacing my main desktop with the 6950X, and now I'm gonna start using this thing in a ITX case, the Lianli T150, and a Ryzen 9 3900X. And I'm, you know, the only reason I picked this board was because the X570 motherboards that are available are either ridiculously expensive, like the Asus Corsair 7 Impact board, which has two M.2 slots and everything, all the high-end features, but that is ridiculously expensive. And the other boards that are affordable are like the X570 boards. They don't have two M.2 slots, and I really wanted that feature. And this is the actually only board out there that supports that feature. So that's the main reason I bought this. Plus, you know, B450 with PCIe Gen 3, it's still enough for my usage. I don't have a Radeon RX 5700 XT or like a PCIe Gen 4 SSD, so PCIe Gen 3 support is just fine for me. So there really isn't any disadvantages to choosing B450 over X570 in my build, because, you know, all my peripherals and all the features that I wanted are on this board. So let's take a look at the box and see what this is all about. So as you can see, they actually put the AMD Ryzen 3000 desktop ready sticker on the box itself, and it's not even a sticker. Usually they just slap on a sticker. They actually changed the box graphics to include that as well, so that, I think that's a pretty nice touch. And you know, you can see the box has the picture of the board itself in the front, and on the back you can see the motherboard and all its features as well. As you can see, this board is an ITX board. It's a square setup. Well, it's just 17 by 17 centimeter, like all ITX boards, and it is a quite a cramped board layout. There's like stacked audio card and M.2 card on here, and a chipset underneath it, and you know, stuff like that, even the Wi-Fi as well. But yeah, enough of the box. There really isn't much to see except for the features listed on the back, and let's just take a look at the board itself. So as you can see, the board is packed in here nice and tidy with some anti-static plastic bag, and you know, underneath it there are some accessories, so we'll take a look at that. Okay, seems like we've got the front panel audio connector extension, it seems like, and we got the rear panel IO cover, which has like a black finish. So this looks really nice. Super neat compared to just the plain silver ones that you get sometimes with motherboards. You get some zip ties, which is kind of interesting because usually you just get zip ties with power supplies, not the motherboard. And you get some M.2 screws. Do you need that? Well, two of them actually, because for the back as well, I'm assuming. And I don't know what this is, but there's a bracket and a screw. And there's also the antenna for the Wi-Fi setup. Some RGB header. Like adapters, I guess. This looks like it'll work with the Phantix adapters, and also some SATA cables, just like any other motherboard these days. And the user manual, as well as the Asus ROG stickers over here. They look pretty cool. I think you're supposed to stick some of them on your motherboard. And there's also a card, ROG card. Okay, well, that's pretty much it for the accessories. Looks cool. There's quite a bunch of accessories that's nice to have. But yeah, let's take a look at the box. At the board itself now, actually, not the box. So yeah, here we go. So taking the board out of the plastic anti-static bag, here you see the board is a pretty simple black color theme affair. So there really isn't any other color. This is all black. Well, this is more like a dark gray finish, and I think it looks really nice. It has a very high-end feel, especially with this area with the metal cover for the M.2 slot. And as you can see, this is the interesting part of this board, which is that it has some like stacked PCBs for the M.2 on the top, and also the audio layout over here. And there's also the chipset underneath all that, if you can see that. There's a chipset heatsink, and there's also the VRM heatsink over here, obviously. And it is quite a beefy one. It looks like it should be adequate. There is some fins cut into it. There's not a super large amount of surface area, but being so large, and being that this board uses a power stage setup, which is pretty efficient, I think it should run quite okay, even with the 3900X that I'm planning to use this. I don't really plan to overclock that crazy, because I know Ryzen 3000 are kind of limited in that front. So even though you have like a 12 core 16 core CPU, you should just enable PBO and leave it at that. No need any crazy overclocking these days. And there's also one 8-pin power connector right at the corner now. There isn't an extra connector, even though, you know, some of the Ryzen 3000 series motherboards have an extra 4-pin for overclocking. Like I said, you don't really need to, because, you know, they boost just fine stock and they're almost at their limit anyways. There's the AM4 socket, obviously, and it uses the standard M4 cooler mounts and the holes as well, unlike the ASRock X570 Phantom Gaming ITX Thunderbolt motherboard, which uses an Intel mount, which is kind of weird. And over at the top, you can also see 3 fan connectors, so that's a nice touch because most motherboards don't have 3 fan connectors for ITX. Usually they only have 2, and that's quite limiting, especially with cases these days can support more than just 2 fans on ITX. And there's also a USB 3.0 front panel connector and USB 2.0, and that looks like some RGB connectors and stuff like that. There's a speaker connector and a front panel connector, 24 pin and 2 DDR4 memory slots, as well as 4 SATA slots that you can populate for SSDs. And on the back side of the board, you can see all the I/O, and well, there's just some USB 3.0 and HDMI, and I guess USB 3.1, I think these are, and this is an Ethernet LAN, and this is powered by the Intel NIC, so that's pretty nice. And there's Wi-Fi as well, and audio input and output. So the main feature of this board is that it has dual M.2 slots. There's one on the back and the other one on the PCB that I showed just now. And this is the main selling feature because I think there isn't enough ITX motherboard for AM4 that has 2 M.2 slots. And that is quite useful because if you're a content creator like I am, or if you just like to store lots of stuff and you don't want to put a bunch of hard drives or anything like that, you can just stick 2 M.2 SSDs into a compact system like this and you'll be all set. Unlike some motherboards when you only have 1 M.2 slots and you'll have to buy a really expensive 4TB or 2TB NVMe SSD. Hi everyone, it's Owen here from Zotac, and in this video I'll be doing an unboxing of the Corsair SF600 600W Gold SFX power supply, and why this is still one of the best power supplies you can get for an SFX ITX build. Now, let's just take a look at the box first and we'll talk about the power supply itself along the way. So, on the back here you can see the features it lists, and it also shows the efficiency rating and the curve, as well as the fan noise level, which is quite surprisingly, they put it all the way up at, looks like 35 dBA, which is audible, but it's not super loud. But I have seen some reviews early on where they pictured the box with the dBA rating all the way up to 40, but I think they fixed that because of that, and because of the earlier reviews that said that this power supply was kind of loud. But they must have fixed that, that's why they changed the graph. And here you can see the power supply also has a feature of ultra low noise, which, if they actually fix that, I'll see it and I'll hear it when I actually use this power supply. But yeah, on the top you can also see the power cable connectors that's included on this power supply, and being that this is an SFX ITX built power supply, there really isn't much, and you can see the lengths are quite short for each cable. Although I do wish that they included more PCIe connectors for graphics cards, because sometimes you do use a high-powered graphics card in an ITX build, and having just 2 6+2 pins is not quite enough sometimes for a really high-end graphics card. But yeah, this is an AT Plus Gold 600W power supply from Corsair, and let's take a look inside. As you can see, this is a really small box, barely just under the size of 2 of my hands, and there's a brown box inside, and we'll just pop that open and see what the power supply looks like. So here we go. If you haven't noticed already, this power supply has tiny everything, even the packaging and the amount of cable that's included inside. So there's I guess important information, and also a user manual for the power supply, which is the SF600 and 450. They're basically the same platform, just different capacities. You got a power cable and a bundle of connectors for the power supply itself. As I said before, the cables are really short for being an SFX power supply, but that's not really a problem. That's actually a plus. And you also get the zip ties and Corsair badge and screws, all the typical stuff from power supply. And whoops, we'll see the power supply itself, which, as you can see here, is a really tiny power supply. I mean, this fits basically on the palm of my hand. So this is a really small size. If you've never seen an SFX power supply before and only use ATX, once you get one of these bad boys, you really see how ridiculously small and densely packed these are. As you can see through the vents, everything's basically super cramped in there. And there is a 92mm fan that Corsair is included on the power supply, and it also has this sticker that says basically the fan might not spin on low load, so don't worry about that. The fan itself is I think an NR092L or something from Corsair that spins up to 4000 RPM, but I don't think it actually spins that fast in actual usage. It's just the maximum rating from what the reviews I've seen are saying. And here's the specification sticker on the side, while the other side has a Corsair SF600 branding. It really is a pretty nice looking, neat little power supply. The build quality is always impeccable, just like any Corsair power supply that I've touched before, as long as they're not the cheapest, VS series or some shit, and those are kind of crap. But yeah, anyways, I've seen the reviews on this power supply, and the reason why I still think this is one of the best ones, even also the reviewers that said it, is because this thing still has one of the best ripple and voltage regulation on any SFX power supplies out there. And yes, the Platinum version is out, and that's even better, but this is still one of the top 3, I think, because I think the only one that competes are the SF600 Platinum or the Seasonic SGX 650 power supply from Seasonic. That one's also kind of at a ridiculous level of performance, but yeah, this is the only one I could get, and this is still a great power supply, which I'm going to be using for my ITX Ryzen 9 3900X build that I'll be showing a video of pretty soon, hopefully. Well, here's the power connectors that's available for the modular power cables. There's 3 PCIe/CPU connectors, 2 peripheral connectors, and also a motherboard 24-pin connector. So there really isn't much, especially for a 600-watt power supply, but like I said, it's an ITX power supply, so that's just how it is, I guess. Even the box is super tiny. Hi everyone, it's Owen here from Zotac, and in this video I decided to do something different compared to normal unboxing on this Gigabyte Aorus X570i Pro Wi-Fi motherboard, which is that there's no box at all. I just kind of already took it out because I figured that actually lots of you guys just wanted to see the product, so let's just get right into it. This is not a full review, it's just like a first look kind of thing on this motherboard. I know I'm really late, but it's only now that I'm doing my mini ITX PC build, and you might have already seen that I was using an Asus Strix B450i, but this popped back in chipset, and because of that it has a chipset fan just like every other X570 motherboard, which to be honest I'm not a big fan of, but I think that is necessary because if you guys didn't know, the chipset on X570 motherboards is based on the IO die chiplet and you can see here they have like a double stacked heatsink with the NVMe drive heatsink as well. So how it works is that the chipset sits down below and the NVMe drive sits on the top where the fan is. And basically it's not like it's a connected heatsink, it's more like there's two heat sinks that's like stacked and kind of overlaps. So the top part with the fan, it doesn't really get blown air, and the top part just is the NVMe heatsink, while the bottom part, which has the chipset heatsink on here, that chipset heatsink is what's getting the most of the airflow from the fan. Although if you put an NVMe drive, the airflow will basically only come out this side and on this side, not directly on the chipset heatsink. But I think it's a pretty clever design to save space because, actually we've seen a lot of manufacturers try to do like some interesting design choices with X570 motherboards on the ITX form factor just because of their necessary to have a heatsink fan, because AMD specifies a higher TDP, I'm guessing. Anyways, now we'll take a look around on the VRM area because this is the most interesting part as well, or second interesting, or first depending on what's your priority. But this thing has an extra powerful VRM. Now you might see here there's lots of phases, but yes, this board has 8 phases for the CPU, and they have 70 amp power stages. So this thing is yeah, pretty powerful. Power IR 70 amp power stages. I think 6 is dedicated to the CPU and 2 is to the SoC, and it's all under this giant heatsink, and this thing will handle any Ryzen 9 3900X or 3950X overclock just fine, because even my Strix B450, which has a pretty weak sauce VRM with only like 240 watts maximum current, handled that just fine too. I actually already built my system, but this will handle it even better. So I'm looking forward to trying per CCX overclock with this, see if I actually get better numbers than the Strix B450i. But yeah, this has a massive heatsink, so temperature shouldn't be a problem. And they have put like some fins on it. Not quite a lot of surface area, but this has lots of mass, and the board is quite heavy because of this heatsink, which also doubles as a I/O cover. So I think that looks pretty nice too. And speaking of the I/O, too well, and you might want it to be a bit more flexible just in case the spacing on the case isn't as perfect. And on top here, there's the CPU power input, obviously, for the VRMs, and it's just a single 8-pin. It should really be enough. ATX motherboards sometimes have 2 inputs. It's really just for show, and yeah, 1 is just enough to push like a 16-core Ryzen. Anyways, you also get 1 fan connector and only 1 other one here, so there's only 2. That's the only bad thing that I've seen about this board, is that it doesn't really have that many fan connectors. The Asus one has like 3, or yeah, it's way more useful. I wish that they'd put more fan connectors on this board, but I don't think it's a big deal. I can just use fan splitters, and that's what I'm gonna do in my build, because it's an ITX build anyways. You won't use that many fans. Anyways, this board also has obviously PCIe connector and 2 DDR4 slots, as well as all the outputs for USB 3.0, although sadly it doesn't have internal USB Type-C, which I really am quite annoyed, because I really wish they'd put that, but this board is already quite crammed as is. And also on this board, that drive on the front with the fan on it. Anyways, the front slot is also wired to the CPU with a 4-lane AMD 500 series chipsets, as well as on the back it's also X4 4.0, except this lane goes through the chipset, and then from the chipset it goes to the CPU. So there's going to be a bit more overhead on this lane, but it really shouldn't be a problem. And they even allow you to RAID 0 both drive slots for a theoretical max performance of like 8 gigabytes, or like, well, technically 10 gigabyte reads on like the Corsair MP600 or the XPG S50, all those Phison based PCIe 4.0 NVMe drives. So this can have some insane storage, because it's quite annoying. I won't need that. So there you go. Not quite a satisfying peel. Should have done that earlier. But yeah, now you can see the board in all its glory without any plastic crap on it. And yeah, for the I/O, well, there's just the normal stuff. There's like some USB. Curiously, they have lots of display outputs, which I don't understand, because yeah, who's gonna use an APU on this socket anyways on X570? So yeah, maybe the Ryzen 4000 with APUs with like 8 cores and Lots of Vega cores might be quite interesting if you're using this board. That's why they're doing that maybe. But yeah, I think they put too much display outs and not enough USB connectors, because there's really only 5 of them here and just one USB Type-C. So that's quite annoying. But you can also see this board has a Q-Flash function, which is Gigabyte's function to flash the BIOS without any CPU or RAM. So that's quite handy if you need to flash this to a newer BIOS without having a CPU handy for like future CPUs, for example. So funnily enough, the X570 is actually that's about it on this motherboard. It looks like a pretty good ITX AM4 X570 motherboard option. It has a pretty strong VRM and as well as pretty good looking design, and looks like a pretty well thought out cooling system. So it also looks like it's on the right price. They're usually in the low 200 range compared to closer to 300 or even 400 plus, like the Asus Impact board. So yeah, if you're looking for an X570 board, this looks like a good option, although I haven't tested it personally, but I think from the reviews I've seen, this should be a pretty good board. Well, I'll look into it once I've got it running in my system. So today I'm going to be doing an unboxing of the Sapphire Pulse RX 5600 XT Black Edition, which is, the Black Edition. It sounds like the higher end card, but really Black Edition here is kind of misleading because it's really the more stripped out version, which, as you can see on the box itself, it's a pretty simple affair. It's just a simple box from Sapphire. Really like their card designs as well. It's pretty simple and it's not a bad thing. Sometimes you don't need flashy boxes to sell your cards, and I guess Sapphire doesn't feel the need to. Anyways, the box is pretty simple. It just shows some of the features and stuff. There's not really much else to it, so let's just open it up and check out what's inside. So aside from this plain looking brown box that the card itself comes in, you really don't get much. You just get this quick installation guide and also the address for Sapphire, and the card itself comes in this bubble anti-static plastic bag, which protects the card from anti-static and being hurt from shipping, I guess. And here you can see the Black Edition card is literally a black card all around. There's just a few accent colors on the backplate and on the fan hubs with the Pulse branding, which is red. But yeah, let's take off the plastic for now. I think that was a pretty decent peel. But yeah, here you go. Finally, you can see the card itself. And here you go on the front, you see two 90mm fans, which Sapphire has put on this card. So they really maximized the size of the fans that I can put on this card. There really isn't any wasted space where they didn't put a heatsink either on the card. So the heatsink goes all the way to over the front of the PCB, like extending past it to the back of it as well. And here in the front you can also see some cutouts for the flow-through airflow design, which is kind of the same thing as what Nvidia has been so proud of their RTX 3000 Founders Edition cards. It's really nothing new, it's just so that the card can breathe better. Sapphire has been doing this for a while. And speaking of the flow-through design, even with this Sapphire card, they also have one PCIe slot empty just for the exhaust to get out of the case immediately. It's also, again, not a brand new feature that Nvidia is touting. And on the back you also get some display ports and also some HDMI ports which you can use, and a full-size exhaust port, like I said. And on the bottom here you can also see the PCIe 4.0 X16 slot, which is a full-size X16 slot, unlike the 5500 XT which only has an X8 slot. And on the top side you can also see the single 8-pin power connector. Since this is really not a power-hungry card, it has a locked TDP of about 160 watts, so it really doesn't draw that much power. And the backplate itself is pretty nice. I would say it's a pretty nice looking card overall. It's just all matte black and just some shiny sheen on some of the accents on the backplate. And here you can also see the cutout for the GPU itself and the bracket for the heatsink. And on the front, again, they really use the biggest fans they can put on this card. It really goes from the back of the card all the way to the front. The front of it is all just fans in it. It's just two massive fans and a big heatsink on this card. So even though it's one of the cheaper options from Sapphire, even for a 5600 XT, it's really not built to be cheap. It does feel pretty nice in your hand, and it seems like Sapphire also has put a lot of thought into the cooling design of this card, just like their other cards, because as you can see, they also cool the memory and also the VRM components directly with the main heatsink, so they're not left to be hot. And in my testing, this card stays really cool at just 60 or something degrees, below 70 degrees for sure, with really quiet fans that you really can't hear. And the memory also doesn't get that hot, only goes up to about mid 80s to like 90 degree maybe. It's not that bad. And well, it also looks pretty nice. So I think for a budget card for a 5600 XT, it's really one of the better options out there. So today I'll be doing an unboxing on the Elgato Wave 1 microphone. And this is a pretty new microphone from Elgato. And the upside of this microphone is basically it has a lot of features compared to their competitors. So even on the side of the box here, you can see the different features that they list here. It's definitely a lot more than a typical microphone you see, because they also have a software stack that you can use for streaming, which you can see on the back here, called Wavelink, which is basically like a virtual mixer of sorts that you can control the inputs and outputs of all the sounds in your PC for when you're streaming or recording a video, like a gameplay for example. And it's meant to be, and basically the software is meant to make it easier for streamers and gameplay recorders to mix their sounds and have the sounds however loud or however quiet they want it to be without being too difficult. And so let's just take open the box and let's see what's inside. And I guess what's interesting about this microphone is that the software stack that they're including is basically the product that they're selling you, even though, well, I guess you can listen for yourself too from this video if you think the sound of this microphone is good or not, because I'm actually using this microphone to record this voiceover, so you kind of have a taste of what this microphone sounds like from the get-go before I even do a full review of this thing. But anyways, inside the box, let's take a look inside and see what do they have. And on top of the box, you can see there's this and as you can see inside the outer box, we have another box which you have to take out and you have to flip open, which then contains all the accessories first on top. As you can see here, there's also the basically like a quick startup guide on how to plug it in and where to download the software and things like that. It's pretty simple. You just have to download their Wavelink software if you want to use it. You can't actually use it without it because it just works as an external microphone. But really, the selling point of this microphone, again, is the Wavelink software. So you're really going to be missing out if you're not going to install that software. Now, in this accessory box, there's just some cable, which is actually pretty nice because this is a USB Type-C cable, which is, you know, way better than USB Type-B that comes with most desktop USB microphones. And you also get this adapter for like a boom mount or basically your own microphone mount if you want to use them. And yeah, well, the cable here is also quite long, so I guess it's quite nice if you need to position your mic quite far from your computer or like in a recording studio if you decide to use this microphone for that. And this will really help get the mic out of the way if you want to put it somewhere away from the computer, because it's really a quite long cable that they included. Now for the microphone itself, it's encased in this like soft touch paper or plastic baggy thing. So here's the microphone itself. I'm gonna show you guys the software later on in my main review. So in this video, I'm just showing the physical aspect of the microphone, which is, you know, the device itself. And as you can see, it's finished in this nice matte black finish, and there's this volume dial on the front here, which is for controlling the microphone gain and also the headphone output, I think. And you can also use it to mute or unmute the mic with just a click. And on the back, you can see the USB Type-C connector for connecting the USB cable to a computer, and also an aux output for your headphones for monitoring. And on the bottom base, you can also see there's like a rubber pad, I guess, for stopping vibration noises. And on the side, you also see the Wave 1 logo engraved onto the side. And it does have a swivel mount on the microphone stand, so you can position it however you want to face your mouth for better directional sound pickup. And again, this is a cardioid condenser mic, so this microphone is really well, it's meant for streamers and gameplay recording people on computers, or you can use it for a recording studio, I guess, as well, if you want to record music. And there's not much else to show you guys except, well, I guess I'm just going to plug in this cable here and show you guys how to do that. It's just USB Type-C, which is pretty nice because USB Type-C is way more durable than like a USB Type-B. So it's nice that they use that standard now. So today I'm going to be unboxing yet another peripheral, and this time it's the Corsair HS50 Pro Stereo Gaming Headset. And this is a headset that's compatible with PC, Mac, Xbox One, PS4, Switch, mobile phones, and everything you can think of basically with an aux port. So the box itself is pretty high quality. It has like some glossy embossing, and also it apparently is Discord certified, whatever that means, because Discord works with everything. And well, on the back of the box and the side, I guess, well, here you go. And on the side here you can see there's some features highlighted, like the plush memory foam adjustable ear cups and the 50mm drivers that they use on this headphone. And here's the more specifications, I guess, on the box itself. You can check it out. Yep, multiple languages, and on the side there's just a picture of the headphone and compatibility. And yeah, let's take it out from the box and check out what it has to offer. So this headset is really meant for any gamer, I guess, because they're marketing it as compatible with everything, which makes sense because it just uses a typical aux audio 3.5mm audio jack, which supports both audio and mic inputs in the same jack. And I think they also provide a splitter if you need a splitter for your PC or something. But yeah, here's the box itself, and inside you got a warranty guide from Corsair. And they also package it by using this plastic strap, which I was kind of confused on how to open in the first place. I thought I had to rip it out, but turns out you just gotta pull it off and it just comes right off. And once you take out the headphones from that, yeah, you don't need to take out the left side. I didn't know that when I was doing this video. But yeah, here's the headphones, and you can see that it has some really nice plush foam around the sides and top. And for the accessories, you also get some cables, which you might need. And also the microphone filter, pop filter thing, the foam filter. And also the microphone itself is actually separate and this baggy, along with the splitter cable for the aux audio port. And yeah, so this headphone is meant for gamers. That's why it has a microphone device. And here, let's see the headphones themselves, and you can see that the memory foam is indeed quite soft, and I think it feels really nice to the touch. So I think it should be super comfortable, but I haven't really tested it out for long periods yet because I'm doing that in my review, which is coming pretty soon. And on the straps itself, they also protect it from scratches using some plastic, so that's pretty nice and thoughtful of them. And the drivers themselves, they're actually enclosed, even though they look like open back. I think they're enclosed. At least it looks like they're actually enclosed. I'll have to check it out in the review. And here you go, same on both sides. They're likely closed back headphones. And you also have some controls and also some connectors on the left side, I think. Yep. And the strap is also connected to the headphones using some really nice aluminum pieces. And they're also obviously adjustable and extendable to the way your head forms around the headphone, so you can adjust it freely. And on the controls, again, let me show you that it has some volume control and also a mic mute and unmute button. And on the left side, you can also see the connector that they put a cover on if you don't want to use your mic, but you could take it off and also plug in your mic there if you need it, which is probably what most gamers are going to do, because, well, this is a gaming headset, and usually when you game with a headset, it's also because you'll want it to use it to speak into the microphone. And for the cable, it's nothing too fancy. It's not braided or anything. It's just a typical rubber cable. And on the accessories pack, again, I'll open it up and show you guys what it has, like some of the aux splitter and also the microphone. And plug it into the port that I showed you before, and it'll just stick there with looks like a 3.5mm jack, maybe slightly modified. But yeah, it just plugs in right there, and there you go. It's adjustable because it's like a bendy type thing, and it stays in place, so I think it should be pretty nice. And you can obviously cover it with the filter that comes in the plastic baggie as well if you want to. And the microphone should be adjustable to wherever you need it to be. Now for the aux splitter, here you can see that it's just splitting it into two input and output, so it's separate like on most computers on the back. So I guess if you're using a PC, that's nice to have compared to having like just a combo aux port that you can't really use on some PCs for the mic input. This will be an unboxing of the Scythe Mugen 5 ARGB edition CPU cooler. And this is a fairly new model from Scythe, which they just basically revamped the looks of their Mugen 5 cooler with some ARGB LEDs on their fans and also a slick black top cover, as you can see on the box here. But first, let's just take a look at the box first, then we can head inside and see what it has inside the package. Well, on the back here, you can see the specifications of the cooler. And well, the fan is 1500 RPM and it's a 120mm based cooler, so that's about the two most important things. And you can also see the pin layout for the ARGB connector, so you can't just plug it into any RGB controller. It needs to be an ARGB header, which is 5 volts, otherwise you might burn out the LEDs. It also supports all the modern sockets like the LGA 1200 and also AM4, obviously, because well, this is supposed to be a new cooler and it'll just basically support any CPU you want to use with this except for Threadripper. Inside the box you can see an accessory box, and underneath it is also the fan. Well, the cooler itself is on the bottom wrapped by this foam that's to protect it during shipping, and the cooler itself here you can see is a simple single tower affair. Well, the fans themselves seem pretty interesting since it seems like they're using the Scythe Kaze Flex fans, and this time with RGB LEDs on the hub with some translucent fan blades, and they also sell these separately. What's interesting with these fans is that, as you can see, the fan blades spin the opposite way to most PC fans, so it spins on clockwise rotation instead of counterclockwise, which is quite an interesting choice. And for the cables themselves, you can see there's the RGB connector, and also this dead end connector looking thing, which I thought I could open, but apparently there's nothing on it. There's just an RGB connector and also a 4-pin PWM power connector. For the heatsink itself, it's also a pretty simple design. It's a 6 heat pipe based CPU single tower heatsink, and it has a pretty fairly normal heatsink fin layout. There's no fancy cut fins or groove fins or anything of that like. It's just a simple big heatsink with 6 heat pipes, which should work pretty well considering it has a lot of heat pipes which are spread pretty evenly throughout the heatsink. On top you could also see it has a black cover, so it looks pretty nice. Now for the accessories, you can see in this box there's just a bunch of things, as you can see here. But another interesting thing is that they also included a screwdriver, which is also a magnetic screwdriver, unlike the Noctua screwdriver that they include, which is not magnetic. So that's one aspect they're better than Noctua. And they also include a user manual, which is pretty detailed and I could understand it pretty well. So I think it's a pretty good manual. And well, they also include the mounting hardware here, as you can see inside this plastic baggie. And basically it includes a thermal paste and also the metal backplate that you can use for the cooler. So on AMD you can use the stock backplate, but on Intel you have to use this backplate. And it also includes the Sky Thermal compound. Not sure what type it is, but I think it should be pretty decent. The backplate itself is quite sturdy. It's a solid piece of metal, so I don't see any problems with that. Now for the screws, it also includes lots of spacers and long and short screws and thumb screws for installation of the CPU cooler on the socket. And you also have the brackets that you have to install onto the cooler depending on which socket you're using, AMD or Intel. Then this bracket goes onto the screws and the backplate on the motherboard. Now you also get these fan clips, and you also get 2 sets so that you can install a push-pull fan setup right out of the box if you have an extra fan. But that's pretty nice that they include an extra one. Well, for now it seems like I'll just install the fan and show you guys how it looks like, and yeah, here you go. Basically the fan just pops in on the front of the heatsink like that. There's like a groove cut out on the heatsink, so it'll automatically center onto the heatsink. Then you can just use the clips onto the fan, then just clip it onto the heatsink. It's a pretty standard heatsink fan clip design. There's no fancy plastic clips like some of the Cooler Master fans or things like that. But this works and I don't see a problem with it. And well, with the fan installed, with the black top as well, and I bet with an RGB, with the RGB actually turned on, I think it should look pretty nice, as this is quite a simple single tower cooler that has pretty nice aesthetic and has lots of heat pipes, so I think it should perform pretty well as well. I'll see about that in my review though, but in this video, I'll be doing an unboxing of the new Scythe Byakko 2 CPU cooler, which is one of the more budget offerings from Scythe, and it's also one of the more compact CPU coolers as well. And as you can see, it supports both the AMD and Intel sockets, and taking a look at the box itself, it's actually pretty fancy for a budget CPU coolers box, and it shows here that it does support AMD, although it does also mention that it doesn't support TR4. But you wouldn't want to use a cooler this small on a TR4 socket CPU anyway, so that's not really a big problem. There's lots of Japanese writing here because Scythe is a Japanese company, and on the left side here you can see the specifications, and it does come with a 2300 RPM 92mm fan, which is a pretty high RPM, and I think it should deliver some pretty good performances from this cooler, which is probably gonna be quite surprising compared to the other coolers once I do the reviews. Now when you open the box, you immediately see the cooler itself on the top, as well as a warning on LGA 1200 support, which is, it's compatible because Intel's been using the same mounting system, which in this case, Scythe has chosen to use the Intel pushpin mounting method, which is kind of an odd choice when a simpler screw mounting method would have been nicer. But I guess this is a budget option, and really it should work pretty well because this cooler is pretty light. But it does concern me a little bit since I would prefer a more solid mounting option. And the AMD mounting is obviously already installed on the cooler itself. Now it also comes with a baggie of thermal paste. Well, it is a budget cooler, so there has to be some compromises, and the way they delivered the thermal paste is in a baggie, which is kind of odd because usually you have it in a tube or pre-applied, but that's not really a big problem. And also for the user manual here, they show how to install it on the AMD socket, which is pretty simple. It's just their typical AMD socket mount. There's no screws involved again. And they also show the Intel mounting system, which is just using the push pin, just like the stock cooler. Pretty simple as well. In fact, I think, like I said again, might be too simple because I'm not too confident those push pins are the strongest in the world. But yeah, here's the cooler itself. It comes with the 92mm Scythe fan. Again, it's 2300 RPM, so it is pretty high RPM, so it should perform pretty well. And the cooler itself is actually finished pretty nicely. There's no bent fins or any blemishes that I see from when I open the cooler. And the cutouts seem pretty unique too on this side, as you can see. Now, I don't know if that's supposed to help with cooling or anything, but it does look pretty cool. And because of the small cooler, they also only use 3 heat pipes, so it is not gonna be a super powerful cooler, but it should still suffice and be a lot better than both Intel and AMD stock cooler. At least that's what I hope it'll be. I'll be testing it against some Noctua coolers that I have and also a Corsair water cooler, so we'll see once I do the review. But this is looking to be a pretty nice little cooler, and especially if you're looking for a low profile solution, this looks to be a great option from Scythe. And I really like that they use these clips for the fans as well. There's nothing too weird. And the clips are pretty easy to use, which I really like because some coolers have really flimsy ass clips, which is pretty annoying to use. And this is the model number. And the fan itself also has some rubber corners on the edges, so it is pretty nice. It'll help prevent vibrations. And the fan is also kind of like this dark gray color on the fan blades and the frame. So it is a different color compared to just a standard fan, and it also comes with a nice sleeve cable, which is quite surprising because some coolers more expensive than this don't even come with a sleeve cable, and it also comes with a black cable underneath the sleeve, so that's pretty nice. In this video, I'll be doing an unboxing on the Aerocool Ore PC case, and this is a new case from Aerocool that features a tempered glass side panel, a mesh front, and a triple 120mm RGB fan setup on the front. Well, RGB, but it's actually FRGB, which is not the typical RGB that you expect. But I'll talk about that later. But first, let's take a look at the case first. So inside you can see that they include some accessories like the user manual, which basically just shows you where to plug in the front panel stuff and the pinouts for those, as well as the accessories that's included in the case, and the USB plugs like USB Type 3, as well as how many fans you can put in this case. And for the accessories itself, you can see that it's attached to this case using some twist ties in a plastic bag, And inside you'll find some screws like for the hard drives and the fans and the motherboard standoffs that you can use for installation, as well as some zip ties for cable management. Now for the cables that's attached to the case, you can see that it comes with some cables such as a USB header 2.0 for the card reader, as well as a reset switch and the power buttons and the LED lights for the front panel. And you also get the HD audio plug over here, as well as another USB 2.0 connector, as well as lastly a USB 3.0 there. Now for this case backside, you can also see that it includes some Molex connections for the front fans, which is a bit telltale sign of what kind of fans these are. These are definitely not super fancy ARGB fans that you usually expect from RGB branded cases, but I'll show you later how these look when lit up. For the case's front panel, you can see there's a power button and the USB inputs, as well as an SD card reader, and on top you also find a ventilation mesh with some filter, which is magnetic, but the filter is really pretty coarse, so I really doubt that'll do anything. Now for the backside, you can see a 120mm fan mount, as well as some breakout PCIe covers, which is pretty typical on a case in this price point, which is, you know, pretty affordable. And the metal that they use itself isn't super thick, so there's a bit of flex on it, but it's really not a big deal because I've actually seen way worse flex on cheaper cases, so in this price point it's actually pretty good in my opinion. And the motherboard deck, it's also a bit flexible, but it shouldn't be a problem once you install the motherboard itself. Now for the bottom side, you can see that there's a ventilation mesh for the power supply intake as well, which is covered by another metal filter, if you could call that a filter, because like I said, it's a bit too coarse for a filter really, and it is attached with this very annoying metal tab thing instead of something magnetic or with sliding rails, so it's not really preferable, but what can you expect in a case this price point? I think it's really not too big of a deal. For the front panel itself, it's actually pretty fully featured. Instead of just USB connectors with USB 2.0 and 3.0, you also get an SD card reader, which supports a big SD card as well as micro SD card. And for the looks itself, it features a tempered glass side panel for the left side, as well as a mesh front panel for better airflow, as well as better RGB lighting on the front. And for the internals, it's actually pretty spacious, and you could probably install a larger motherboard than it officially supports because it's pretty flat. While here on the front panel, you can see the triple 120mm FRGB fan that Aerocool has put in on this case, which are again not just typical RGB fans, but FRGB, which I'll explain once I plug these fans to power. But yeah, we'll see how these perform in the review as well. So one thing I have to comment about the fans is that they kind of have a smaller blade diameter than most 120mm fans, just because of the RGB lighting ring around the fans. And they do have just a 4-pin Molex connector, which is not preferable, because Molex is pretty annoying to plug in, which I'll show here. But the good thing is that I guess you can daisy chain all the fans off of one Molex connector, which makes it pretty simple, I guess, to build in this case, because you just have to plug it in once. And it just goes in like this, which is pretty annoying for a Molex connector actually, because they're never easy to plug in because of the pins that always moves around inside. But yeah, so you just plug it into a Molex connector from your power supply and it'll just run at full speed, which again shows that these are not really performance fans, because you know you can just run full speed from the Molex connector and you don't really have to control their RPM because they're not that fast to begin with. But yeah, this is how the fans look. They have an RGB, with quotes, ring around the fan, which is basically just a multicolored LED ring, which you can't change the color of or change the mode at all. It's just fixed like that. That's why Aerocool is calling it FRGB for fixed RGB. It's kind of misleading because most people think RGB as in like changeable LED lighting. This should really be just called rainbow fan lighting instead of RGB lighting, because that's really not. But I guess it looks pretty nice, as you can see here in the dark. The LEDs are pretty bright and they're pretty smooth in terms of the transition between the colors on the ring. But I do think that they might get a bit boring once you've used them for a while. Okay, so today I have this Powercolor RX 5600 XT to unbox. And I'll do a short comparison to the Sapphire as well in the next video, which is gonna be like a quick review of it to see the cooling performance and stuff. But for now, let's take a look at this Powercolor card, which according to them has an efficient cooler, as you see on the features on the back. And also, well, the typical RX 5600 XT features, as well as minimum specifications for the power supply and stuff. And as well as they actually mentioned they're manufactured by the TUL Corporation, which Powercolor is a part of. And TUL also makes cards for brands such as Club 3D previously, but I think they kind of killed off that brand. Anyways, let's take a look what's inside the box, which, by the way, I think that this box feels a bit higher quality than the Sapphire card that I unboxed previously, the Sapphire Pulse Black Edition. So this is a nice start. It has the same brown box inside cover on the outside, but then the cover outside is slightly thicker and the inside brown box is also more sturdy, thanks to them using an actual foam piece to protect the graphics card instead of what Sapphire did, which is really not as good as this. And aside from including the driver disc as well as the user manual, which actually comes in a lot of languages, as you can see here, and pretty clear instructions on how to install the graphics card. So I'm actually quite surprised to see such a user manual when most graphics card manufacturers really don't care about user manuals anymore. They really just put a few steps and be like, oh, there you go, just plug it in, I guess. But this one's much more detailed and they even have multiple languages, so that's nice to see. And again, like I said, they use really nice foam padding for the graphics card, so it'll stay safe inside the box. Instead of Sapphire's packaging, which is just put it inside the box and kind of good luck, I guess. Well, this one's also padded on the side, so this will be safer when you ship it from some retailer. And also, the card is inside this anti-static wrap, obviously, anti-static plastic bag. And let's go and take it out, and immediately I feel like I can smell a strong chemical smell with this card, which is a bit different from the other PC components that I've seen before. But yeah, let's take a look at the card itself instead of smelling it. And as you can see, this card is slightly taller than the PCIe bracket height, so it is an extended height card. And that's because it does have dual 100mm fan, although it's actually more like 92mm fans. And yeah, that's pretty large for a 5600 XT, and including the backplate on the back as well. This card is a pretty sturdy card, and as you can see that this backplate has a sort of brush finish, as well as having the BIOS labels on the bottom left side for the switch on the BIOS. So that's pretty nice. Usually most backplates and PCBs don't have labels for their dual BIOS. And you can see that they actually have a second 8-pin power input location for the PCB, which I'm thinking is probably because this PCB is the same as their Red Devil card as well, because they kind of have the same height, just that the Red Devil has a much larger heatsink. And even the outputs are the same, although as you can see, the venting on the bracket is kind of useless because these are vertically oriented fins, so they kind of blow air on top and the bottom, and so the rear vents really don't do anything at all. And they just exhaust out the top and the bottom towards the motherboard, and as you can see on the top here, it's pretty open, and that's pretty good for heatsink airflow, which this heatsink seems to have 5 heat pipes, which are actually also soldered to the heatsink, which is nice to see because some cheaper cards don't have solder onto the heatsinks from the heat pipes, which is not really ideal for heat transfer. And as you can see that it has 5 heat pipes, and you might think, what's the top heat pipes on the left there? They kind of just loop it back to the heatsink. But yeah, the whole heatsink is also covered by the 2 fans pretty well. They position the fans not just for aesthetic, it's more of a really functional looking card to me. And it does look pretty classy as well with the chrome surrounds around the fan. It's not super gamery looking like the Sapphire or MSI cards, for example. This is a pretty simple design, and this is a no frills, low budget, not low budget, more like one of the cheaper offerings for 5600 XT. So it is made out of plastic, and the quality is not the best using like all metal or anything like that, but it's really solidly built, and I feel like this is still a pretty good quality card when you hold it in your hands. And although I prefer that they don't put the Powercolor branding on the side, because that's a bit too big for me, and I would prefer them just putting Powercolor on the backplate that looks kind of like the Red Dragon logo that they put there, which is more low-key and less distracting to the card's design, which is already pretty low-key. And again, on the back here, you can see the outputs, which is triple display ports and 1 HDMI out. In this video, I'm going to do an unboxing of a GTX 1660 Super. And even though it's not a new card, it's still a card that's still available as Nvidia's lower end GPU lineup, so it's still pretty much very relevant to take a look at. And this one's from Colorful. It's their BattleAx version, which is basically their lowest end model. But as you can see, the box is still really nice, and as you'll see later, the card is also still pretty nice, especially for this price point. And on the back here, you just see some of the features, like they say they use high quality electronic components, probably for the VRM, and select the GPU core, which just might mean, well, it passes QA testing, so it shouldn't have any problem, as well as a lot of the Nvidia features that you get with other Turing cards as well on the bottom here. And, well, you don't see the recommended specifications of your PC and the specifications of the card because it's actually not on here, it's on the bottom here. And there you go, the features as well as the minimum system requirements for this graphics card, which is pretty standard for a GTX 1660 Super. And this is a card from Colorful, so this is from China, so it's a bit different. That's why it has some Chinese lettering on the sticker, for example. And once you open it, you can see that you have the Colorful Quick Guide, which is a typo, I guess. It should have been Quick Start Guide, but like I said, it's a Chinese company, so maybe their grammar isn't the best. But their product is still really nice, especially once you see that the packaging is really well built as well. They use lots of actual like foam padding for the graphics card, so I don't see any reason for it to get damaged in shipping at all. And it's a really nice packaging, especially for a card on this price point, which is way above the others, which is using way cheaper packaging materials. So this is already a plus for Colorful with the better packaging. And once we open the card, which is inside this anti-static bag, you can see the card itself. And I think the most striking thing about it is its red and black color scheme, which is a bit kind of like an AMD color scheme to me, so it doesn't really scream Nvidia to me, and in fact it looks like an AMD card. So if you're not into red, then this might not be for you, but otherwise the card itself actually looks really nice, and I think that the heatsink is large enough for a GTX 1660 Super, even though it only has one heat pipe, which seems to kind of wrap around the base and towards the two ends of the heatsink. It should be enough. This isn't a really high power card. And they also seem to have thermal pads to connect the VRM as well as the VRAM to the heatsink, while the VRM actually has a separate heatsink here, as you can see, which is separate from the main heatsink. But they're all cooled by a heatsink, so it should stay nice and cool, especially this thing being a GDDR6 card, which runs a bit hotter. And on the back, you can see you have a backplate, which is actually pretty nice looking. It's not just a plain backplate, they actually put some thought into it and put some artful, like colorful branding as well as some stripes and logos and stuff. The only gripe I have is they put way too many stickers on the back here, which kind of ruins the look because it makes it not that clean, but it's kind of the case with a lot of cards, so I wouldn't give them too much flack for it. And on the top here, you can see that they have the GeForce GTX logo. So in case you're wondering if this is an AMD card because it's red, it's actually a GeForce card. And you also have a single 8-pin, which is pretty standard for GTX 1660 Super, which allows a bit of power headroom. And speaking of power, you can see the shunt right beside the 8-pin. So if you're trying to do a shunt mod, you can actually do it without taking apart the card and probably still keep your warranty if you can wipe it off after you're done if you're trying to RMA it. So yeah, this card is pretty good for overclocking, I guess, if you do some shunt mod, especially because the heatsink is actually pretty large with dual fans. And the heatsink is a lot bigger than the Zotac card, which I've taken a look as well, which I'll upload a video of. So this is pretty nice for GTX 1660 Super. And being a horizontal fin design, it has a vent on the back which will exhaust some air, as well as the DisplayPort, HDMI and DVI outputs for your monitor. And on the bottom, you have the typical PCIe 3.0 connector for your motherboard connection. And again, the heatsink is spanning the whole length of the card. And it has two fans which are fairly large and cover the whole heatsink, which also again covers all the memory chips as well as the VRM. So it is pretty well cooled. And speaking of the backplate, they actually also use some thermal pads to connect it to the VRM side, which I forgot to show, but they actually do have a thermal pad, so they're actually using the backplate for that, aside from just strengthening the card, which, by the way, is also really stiff. And it's really nice to see, because after seeing some of the Asus cards, which are really flimsy for the cheap models, this is really nice to see that they make a card that's really well designed and the heatsink is properly fastened onto the card that doesn't flex that much. And yeah, overall it's a pretty well built card, especially for GTX 1660 Super. And for a card in this price range, you really don't need much more than this, and it really doesn't make sense to buy a high-end GTX 1660 Super and pay a whole lot of premium like the Asus Strix, for example. In this video, I'll be doing another unboxing of another GTX 1660 Super. This time it's from Zotac, and this is the Zotac twin fan version, and yeah, that's what they call it. It literally doesn't have a proper name. Anyways, this card has 6GB of GDDR6 just like any other GTX 1660 Super, as well as Zotac's special features, as you can see on the back of the box, as well as the specifications and minimum system requirements, and all the features that you get from typical NVIDIA GPUs as well, because this is a Turing-based GTX 1660 Super, just like any other 16 series GPUs. You get all the NVIDIA GeForce Experience features and, well, all the Turing features, like I said. So this is pretty standard for GTX 1660 Super. And honestly, the card is just a pretty basic dual fan card from Zotac. There's nothing too special about it either, so they really aren't putting any lot of special Zotac features on the box either, and that's quite understandable. So let's just get this thing open and see what we have inside. Once we open the box, you can immediately see there isn't much. There's just this package. Inside you have some user manual and like the CD driver disc and stuff like that, as I'll show you guys. Here you go, you get some promotional material from Zotac, because apparently if you have this graphics card, you still need to buy their gaming PC, which already have their graphics card. That makes a lot of sense. Sure. Anyways, you get a quick installation guide, this time with no typos, instead of like colorful card. Anyways, you also get this very nice latest GeForce drivers are available at geforce.com card, which is better than an actual driver disc, because that's pretty useless. No one actually have a CD drive these days. Anyways, let's open up the packaging here, which is a bubble wrap anti-static bag for the card. And there isn't any soft foam in this case, which is a step down from colorfuls. But here you go, the card is pretty simple. Like I said, it's just a very small dual fan card from Zotac. There isn't anything too extraordinary from it. It's really simple, and even the fans are really tiny. As you can see, the card is barely longer than the PCIe slot, and it doesn't even have a backplate. So this is clearly a very cost-down GTX 1660 Super for being a very small card like this one and not having even a backplate. But it should be still enough for GTX 1660 Super. And the heatsink itself seems to be pretty well built, and it does have some weight even though it's pretty small. And the fans are actually different sizes, as you can see, because one of them needs to be smaller so that the length of the card stays within this size instead of having it way longer when you use the same size fans. And the heatsink itself is also still designed pretty well, cooling the memory chips as well as the VRMs directly using thermal pads. So that's at least taken care of, because some cheaper GPUs don't cool their memory or VRMs actively, which is not great. And it does seem like it has 3 heat pipes, which extends to the length of the heatsink, which is horizontally oriented just like a lot of smaller cards, so it'll exhaust a lot of hot air from the front as well as some of it through the back on the PCI bracket. And here you can see the thermal pads connecting the VRAM, which is GDDR6, which gets a bit hotter than normal GDDR6, so that's pretty nice that they actually cool it. And also the 8-pin is right on top over there, which powers the VRM section, which is on the back here. That also has a thermal pad, so that's pretty nice that it gets cooled by the main heatsink as well, instead of just the GPU. And the fan's airflow should come out on the back, on the gaps on the heatsink, like on this side, on the bottom, and on the top of the card. And here on the top of the card, you can see a single 8-pin, which is again pretty standard for GTX 1660 Super. It doesn't consume a lot of power, and it should leave you enough overclocking headroom for power limits, because it's an 8-pin instead of just a 6-pin. And the VRM should be more than capable of handling just a 1660 Super. On the back, you can see there's a big vent that some of the hot air will exhaust through, as well as a row of display outputs with display ports and an HDMI. It doesn't have a DVI port, so if you're still rocking a monitor with that, maybe this card isn't for you. And something like a colorful card would be much better suited. And yeah, again, this card is really small. It should be pretty suitable for an SFF PC. It really doesn't consume a lot of space, so if you're looking to make a tiny PC, this might be a great choice. But otherwise, it's not really that remarkable, and the colorful card probably will have better cooling just because of the heatsink is way larger than this. Even though this also should still cool it pretty well from my experience from testing this one, so you shouldn't have any problems with it. It just barely gets over 70 degrees when testing it. So it should still do fine in a lot of builds that are bigger anyways. So you might have already seen me unbox a Silverstone PF240 water cooler before, the original black color one. But that unit had some issues, so Silverstone sent me this as a replacement, the PF240W. It's just the difference is it's a white version, so all the components are colored white, And it does also still have the ARGB coloring for the RGB, and it supports all of the ridiculous different standards for RGB control from all the motherboard vendors. And yes, it's addressable RGB, so you can color it however you want at any portion of the fan. So here's also the specifications of the cooler. It does have a 6-pole design for the pump motor, which is pretty nice to see. And it does also include an ARGB controller, so if your PC doesn't have an ARGB controller, you can still use the ARGB function. And yeah, the pump housing is made out of plastic, while the base is copper. It's pretty standard. The pump speed is 3400 RPM, and the fan speed is up to 2200 RPM, which is pretty nice because that's a pretty high RPM, and the lowest range is at 600, so you can tune the fan to however you want it to be. Now for the special features, you can see there's a lot of language here. It basically just says it has ARGB and all the features of the coolers and in different languages. So let's open the box and see what we have inside. So on opening the box, you immediately are greeted by some user manuals. One for the ARGB controller, which is a separate piece of paper, because it is kind of a separate device that Silverstone has. And you also get the cooler's user manual, which is actually pretty detailed with the AMD steps on one side, as well as the components that are included in the package. And it's all drawn out pretty nicely and clearly, so you shouldn't have any problems installing this. This is a pretty simple installation actually for this cooler, but I'll test it out in my review. And on the other side, you also get the Intel installation instructions. Here you can see the installation instructions are again clearly marked and drawn out, so you can see how to install this by yourself, and you shouldn't have any issues in installing this cooler. Then you also get this warranty information. And you also get this foam padding for protection in shipping, as well as a typical carton packaging for an AIO liquid cooler. And here you have the two fans that are included. These are Silverstone fans, 2200 RPM, and these are colored white in all their components, so it does look really nice. So if you're looking for a cooler for a white team build, this might be it. And as you can see, the fans themselves are pretty simple. There isn't anything too fancy. And it does have this kind of frosted fan blades on it, so the RGB coloring should shine pretty nicely onto the fan blades and get dispersed. And for the cables, you also get the RGB connections as well. These are 3 pins, just like any ARGB connections. And they're not proprietary, so you can pretty much connect it to anything. And it's daisy chainable as well, because you have 2 fans here. So I think you're supposed to daisy chain them together to the controller that's included. And it's the same thing with the second fan as well. Then you also get the plastic bag for all the accessories. And finally, let's just take a look at the cooler first before we take a look at the accessories and installation kit. Now for the radiator, it's a dual 120mm radiator, and it's also all painted white to match the white theme of this cooler. And it does look really nice. The paint is pretty nicely done, and I think it matches any white build that you might want to do pretty well. And the hoses themselves are also sleeved, so it does look really neat. Although the color is a bit off for the sleeve as well as the pump housing and the radiator, because they're all different materials, but it shouldn't be a problem. And the pump housing also does look really nice with that Silverstone logo on top, which is RGB, and a very shiny copper base plate on the bottom of the pump for contacting the CPU. So it should have no problems with contact with the CPU IHS. And the pump housing is also connected to the hoses using some swivel fittings, so you should have no issues positioning it however you want, especially with the hose length, which is pretty ample for this AIO liquid cooler. As you can see, even the fins are painted white, So the whole thing is painted white color, not just black, although you can see there's some blemishes on the paint, which is, I think, kind of excusable because, well, it's paint, it's not gonna be super perfect, but yeah, maybe a nicer finish would have been nice. And if you put the fans in front of the radiator here, you can just have an idea of how it'll look in a system. And I think it does look really nice. Everything is white colored in this kit, so it's all sticking to the white color theme, and especially with RGB lighting, I think white color is the best color because it does reflect everything instead of black. Especially if you're doing a white build, this might be the best white cooler you can get because this is not even the most expensive cooler. And some of the Corsair coolers, for example, especially the white ones, cost a pretty penny and an extra for the white color, so this might be a great alternative. First of all, let's take a look at the ARGB controller stuff. This is the SATA power adapter. So it's nice that they powered this from SATA and not Molex. And also the adapter for connecting the ARGB cables to the controllers, as well as connecting the controller to more ARGB cables. I guess there's a lot of options to connect it. And as you can see, the controller is pretty simple. There's just 3 buttons for you to change the mode, speed, and the colors. And yeah, you basically connect this cable onto the end of the ARGB controller, and you can connect the other ends to the cooler as well as the fans. Now for the mounting hardware, you obviously get the typical LGA 2011 mounting hardware, and you also get the fan mounts and radiator mount screws, and you also get the mounting hardware for your AMD and Intel sockets as well in this baggie. Then you also get this cable, which is a splitter for the ARGB connections, and also a Y splitter for a 4-pin PWM fan connector, so you can split your fan connector from your motherboard for the 2 fans, and an adapter for a 3-pin to power the pump with. And also obviously the brackets for your Intel and AMD CPU cooler mounting hardware, as well as a thermal grease for between the cooler and your CPU, and it should be a pretty decent thermal paste. So yeah, that's basically how it'll look, and I think it does look really nice. For the performance, it'll probably be similar to any other 240mm radiators in terms of performance, as long as their pump is pretty adequate. But that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you do, please leave a like and maybe comment down below if you have this cooler, and maybe click subscribe to see more of my future videos, like a review of this cooler for example. Thanks for watching.